I'm going to walk through a little bit of just my career, kind of in order of how I went from film to commercial video games to social impact video games to other social impact technology businesses. And as Tim mentioned, feel free to post questions in. I'm happy to stop and answer them, and hopefully there'll be time at the end to answer any questions you have. So, the PowerPoint's a little bit slow. I think it will forward soon. I started my career in the 1980s, actually in Hollywood. I got a degree in international politics, but I love movies. I love the idea of storytelling, and kind of worked my way up in Hollywood. And then I had a chance to go to China in the mid to late 80s and study the film industry. And it was a fascinating experience to see the world of movies, the world of storytelling from a completely different social, political context. China was opening up under Deng Xiaoping, and the fifth generation filmmakers were starting to make, very interesting films. That led me to become a film critic in Hong Kong, where I really got more and more into understanding the power of storytelling in society. And I was looking at it very much through the lens of movies, because that's kind of what I grew up on: movies, TVs, more linear media. So I was happily sort of doing my independent film career when I got a call out of the blue in the early 90s from a young guy along with two of his buddies. He had bought Activision literally for hundreds of thousands of dollars. The company was more or less bankrupt at the time, and in Silicon Valley. And he had an idea that games were going to be transformational. And that instead of just one or two programmers working on a game, they were going to need Hollywood writers, animators, storytellers. The CD-ROM was coming out in the early 90s, so there was a lot of storage. And so he moved the company along with his two friends to Hollywood. They hired me from the film industry, and I wasn't a gamer. I had played Pac-Man and Asteroids in the arcade boxes in college, but I didn't really think of myself as a gamer. But my girlfriend at the time, now my wife of more than 20 years, was a gamer. And she had me play games like King's Quest, It Came from the Desert, Leisure Suit Larry, these interactive adventure games from the early 90s. Some of you may remember them. And I was fascinated. These were lean forward, not lean back entertainment. They were interactive, not passive. It was player-driven stories. It was an entirely different mode of storytelling. And it struck me as, well, that's kind of interesting. I thought I would do it for, a few months. I had no idea whether this company would work or not. There was just a handful of people there at the time. Tim, you want to go to the next slide? This was the reaction to almost all of my friends at the time in the film industry, especially the indie film industry and the kind of social impact film industry. They were horrified. I mean, to them, video games were at best mindless entertainment, at worst, truly destructive. And this was the period when Mortal Kombat was coming out, and there was some genuine and real concerns about video games. And they couldn't understand why I would leave a career in independent film to work on video games. Next slide. I mean, this sort of characterized the kind of reaction you saw from a lot of different people towards video games. And yet, as I started to work on some of these games, Tim, next slide, please. I found an entire world that was truly remarkable. These are just some of the games that were developed in the studio. I started as head of creative affairs, then head of production, then I ran the studios. And it just fascinated me how rich and complex these games were. I'll pick a couple out just as interesting examples. Some of these were very successful names you probably recognize, some less so. The Spycraft game was fascinating. This was right after the Cold War, and the world was changing. And so I'd always been fascinated by spy fiction. And games, in many ways, are about verbs because they're interactive, they're actives. A lot of people think of the action verbs. You run, you jump, you shoot. But there's also other verbs. You explore, you solve, you decide. Spying has all the verbs. It has the action verbs, it has the thinking verbs. And so we decided to do a very literate spy game where we actually got the former head of the CIA and the former head of the KGB, the actual guys. It turns out that agents have agents, and we were able to track them down. They had never met each other. They had never worked together. And we asked them, what are the most difficult decisions you made in your career and what keeps you awake at night? And then we put the player in the position of having to make some of these searing moral decisions within a political context. And I realized just how powerful games were. You can step into roles, you can take on an identity, you go into a problem space, you make decisions and you get feedback. And it occurred to me, this is an entirely new mode, not just of storytelling, but of learning, of social change, of so many different things. We had a chance to work on one of the Civilization games. Civilization was created by the iconic game designer Sid Meier, but we had the rights to do one game and we didn't have Sid Meier. I wasn't really excited about doing it because it's such a remarkable franchise, but we did make one of the versions, and we had to build everything from scratch. And I realized to make a game about history, you have to deeply understand history, and that got me into thinking about youth game making, because to make a game about a subject, you have to have mastery of that subject, deep mastery. And in making Civilization, we had to make all sorts of assumptions about history. And I realized as we were building our algorithms and tech trees, none of it's neutral. And it really hit me how algorithms aren't neutral. They're human driven with human assumptions. So that was really, really fascinating. And just from a maker perspective, a popular game like Tony Hawk, the physics that goes into that. So that got me thinking about kids making games again. So, I mean, the more I got into interactive fiction, storytelling, just the entire game industry, I realized what a remarkable textured industry it is. And the company, we had some big hits and the company took off. It's now one of the largest game companies. So I also had a chance to be part of a great business building experience. Tim, you want to get the next slide? By the end of the 90s, I was kind of burnt out. The company had gone from, a dozen or so people to over 1,000. So it was, around the clock work. It was exhilarating. But I also got really interested in the power of games for both good and bad. I was interested in the negative aspects of games, as well as the positive potential of games and positive aspects of game. The management team at Activision was more about building a business, making money and entertainment, and not so much into the social impact of games. So I decided to move on. I got involved in double bottom line businesses, triple bottom line businesses, businesses that can make money and make impact outside of the game industry, but still in the arts and storytelling space, and had a chance to speak at the World Economic Forum in Davos about social impact businesses, not games specifically. And I met one of the co-founders of Games for Change, a New York-based nonprofit that has the mission of rising the sector of games for impact. I didn't know it existed. I didn't even know there was a community of practice around social impact games. And I was super excited to learn about this nonprofit. I joined the board. I became chairman of the board. Tim, next slide, please. And I was amazed at this point, and this is kind of around 2004, 2005, that so many different foundations, government agencies, family offices, social entrepreneurs were seeking to harness the power of games for some sort of learning, health, social impact. At that point, there was actually a federal games working group in the US where 33 different federal agencies had program officers working on games in the public interest of various forms. It still exists. It's run by the Woodrow Wilson Institute right now in Washington, DC. There was a games and learning cluster around the University of Wisconsin that was fascinating, a serious games initiative, a games for health initiative. I was tracking literally not tens, but hundreds of millions of dollars coming from universities, foundations, government agencies, social entrepreneurs, all trying to harness the incredible power of video games, computer games, interactive environment for some sort of learning and health or social impact. Next slide, Tim. And the reason why, I touched on when I was talking about Activision is, games give you agency. You take on many different roles. It could be a scientist, it could be explorer. You go into a problem space and then, you have to act. And one of the things that people miss, one of the most powerful things about games are, most of the time you fail in games, but you're constantly getting feedback on how to solve the problem or improve your mechanics. You get feedback from other players. You get feedback from the technology, the game itself. You get feedback from mentors. You get feedback from teammates, and you level up towards mastery as however the game designers define mastery. It cultivates creativity, collaboration, all the kind of 21st century skills, problem solving, critical thinking, if designed well. Not all games do it, not all games do it well, but at the core, games are learning platforms. And so the research that was coming out of a lot of this funding was showing great potential. But, next slide, please. But we saw a huge gap, a gap between the amount of investment going into games for learning, health, social impact, and what was coming out of the other side, even if it was free and philanthropic, or if it seeks some sort of commercial return. And often, if you have a game as a service, that is a game that doesn't end, like a Minecraft or a World of Warcraft, you need ongoing funding because it's not a game you finish. It's a game that is continually upgraded and improved. There was very little coming out the other end that was competing for youth, young adult, especially discretionary time or dollars, or meaningfully replacing time or money in the classroom. Because you're always replacing something when you're introducing something new. And yet there was clearly great potential for the medium. So along with a colleague, Michael Angst, who I actually knew from film, but was a successful private equity investor and operator, his last investment created 10,000 jobs in the poorest areas of India and was actually his biggest financial return, which got him interested in social impact businesses, aligning business model with impact. We decided to start Eline Media. Next slide, Tim. And the vision, the E comes from, we want to engage, educate, empower. And we wanted to try to work with some of these agencies, find the best projects that really had great potential, but didn't necessarily have either the development or publishing craft or discipline to really make an impact out there, to kind of bring the rigor of an Activision from a development and publishing. And development is the actual making of the game, the design, the writing of the code, the art, but the publishing is equally important. Who is the audience that you're going after? How are you going to reach the audience? How are you going to sustain it? All the things that are on the sort of marketing, distribution, business model side. And they're often deeply interrelated. The design and the context of how a game comes to market are deeply interrelated. And even on an impact side, there's a lot of great research that shows the real impact of games, and especially game-based learning, happens in and around the game versus the game itself. It's the scaffolding, it's the conversation, it's everything that happens around it. So the development and publishing is deeply, deeply integrated. And we wanted to see if we can help realize the potential of some of these remarkable, what I would call research projects. Next slide. So our first product was GameStar Mechanic. This was researched by some of the best game-based learning people. For those who know the space, James Paul G, and I would Google him. He's sort of the father of game-based learning in many ways. He was at the University of Wisconsin, then Arizona State University, a big reason why I'm in Arizona right now. And Katie Salen, who co-founded a nonprofit called Institute of Play. They actually opened a game-based learning public school in New York called Quest to Learn. They were two of the key designers and learning scientists on the project. And it was a game designed to teach kids to make game, to cultivate systems thinking, critical thinking, and a motivation and pathway towards STEM. Next slide. I learned a lot just by watching their work, understanding their work. There were actually 2 PhDs written about this project. One guy went on to run the Gates Foundation game-based learning portfolio. The other went to Microsoft for their game-based learning portfolio. And they really broke down some truly amazing ideas, which is, if you want to learn to make technology, to make things, they would have you play games, and then they would selectively, or we would all collectively, we would selectively break them, and then you would fix them. And when you fix them, you're learning 2 things. You're learning how games work as a system and what happens when different parts of the system break, but you're also learning the tools, the actual interface and tools to manipulate the game and fix it as a system. So it really did cultivate systems thinking in an interesting way. And then we give the players feedback. We give them both quantitative and qualitative feedback. Quantitative feedback is we give them heat maps. They can watch how people play their game and where people had trouble and fix it. True quantitative, but also qualitative. What kind of reviews are getting? We ran a very safe space. This is for young kids, 8 to 12. And we also built a very flexible curriculum. We found that we could seep into schools. We didn't have any salespeople per se. We really just went to teacher conferences, had them play the game, listened to them, and figured out how to reduce friction so they could bring it into the classroom. Next slide, please. So we've had some success with it. We've gotten into over 10,000 schools. We've had millions of games created by kids, and we're still running it. We actually are deciding where we want to go next with the franchise, which I can talk about later. But that led us to a really unique opportunity. Next slide. We were approached by two teachers who had a company called Teacher Gaming, who had got the exclusive rights to do an educational mod of Minecraft. A mod is a modification. One of the things that has made Minecraft so ubiquitous is that you can mod it. With some of the most popular games out there, there's a whole community that can mod, which is basically adapting the game to do things that the original game designers didn't necessarily intend, but fit within the basic genre and goals of the game. And so we had the rights to do an educational mod and sell it into schools. And it took off like crazy. It was really, people say you can't get innovation into schools. Mostly what we had to do, almost all of the curriculum was teacher created. Mostly what we had to do was just, again, reduce friction for how do teachers find it? How do we make it really easy for them to get started and manage the class? How do they find the best curriculum around it? And it's everything from civics to coding. We actually had a chance to do a mod called QCraft around quantum computing and Minecraft, because quantum computing is where things can be at two states at the same time or change their behaviors, actually works very well with the language of Minecraft, remarkably. And we were planning to actually go into game-based learning as a business when, out of the blue, Minecraft got sold to Microsoft. Notch, the creator, sold it for a couple $2 billion, kind of surprised all of us. We ended up, along with Teacher Gaming, selling our interests because Microsoft, unlike Mojang, was in the education business, and they've actually done a really good job with what's now called the Microsoft Education Edition. And there's amazing teachers all over the world doing remarkable things with Minecraft. So, we were pleased to be a part of that. Around that time, our whole trajectory changed. Next slide. We got a call from an Alaska Native tribe. At that point, we were doing a fair amount of consulting with folks that wanted to do social impact games, and we had always wanted to do a consumer game. GameStar and Minecraft were really more school-based than they were consumer-based. And we worked on all sorts of interesting projects. We did civic engagement in the Middle East during Arab Spring. We worked on sustainable farming in Central America. We did some mobile games in refugee camps. I would call it games as aid. But we had never done a real consumer game, competing in the consumer market. And interestingly, the first opportunity to do that came with an Alaska Native tribe called the Cook Inlet Tribal Council. They wanted to do an impact investment, so they wanted to make money. They wanted to do an impact investment that shared and celebrated their culture with a global audience, because their culture has been misrepresented by almost all media. They wanted to do it truly inclusively. They didn't want us to make a game about the Alaska Native peoples. They wanted to make a game wanted us to make a game with them, truly inclusive, and they wanted it to be profitable and to empower their youth. Next slide, please. So we actually, Mike and I flew up there, and we initially tried to talk them out of it, because spending a couple $1 million into an individual game is really risky. And this is a social service nonprofit that does amazing work with their community. And we just didn't feel responsible telling them that, sure, you can make this game, it'll make money. We went through all of the economics of independent games. And what was interesting is we were all men, they were all women as a leadership team, which was interesting. We came from totally different backgrounds, but we really shared a passion for, wouldn't it be great if we could pull this off? So rather than say yes or no, we ended up going into a 6-month landscape and opportunity analysis where we really studied commercial media, indigenous commercial media. We were very inspired by Whale Rider, a movie I'm sure many of you are familiar with. As well as, we looked at world music, we looked at graphic novels like Persepolis, and we saw that there was a hunger for truly authentic stories told from very different perspectives, but it had to be done at a very high level of craft. Good intentions were not good enough. And so we agreed that if we could find the right game development team, or put together the right game development team, and the right team from the Alaska Native community that was committed to inclusively going on a journey, taking a story that had been passed down for thousands of years and turning it into a video game, we couldn't reduce all the risk, but we could reduce the risk enough that it was worth trying. And they had the courage, and so we went ahead, and it was an amazing 2-year journey. We spent a lot of time up on the North Slope in Alaska. They spent a lot of time at game development conferences. The game community is also a fascinating culture. It's a newer culture, but it's a fascinating culture. So we spent a lot of time in each other's worlds. We agreed from the very beginning the game would be in the Inupiat language. And one of the really interesting things we did with the game was we had shot probably about 30 hours of research footage, interviews, just the landscape. And the footage was so interesting, and the community and the elders and the youth were so interesting. We really wanted the players to experience it, but we knew if we just put up a website, they wouldn't go and watch the videos. So we cut them into 26 very short insight videos. You did not have to watch them, but they got unlocked in the gameplay. So if you're playing a level and something was inspired by an individual or a story or a region, we would make a little video about it. And it turned out that players really liked that mix of modalities of interactive video gameplay with linear storytelling. So I'm going to play a short trailer so you can get a sense for the game. Tim, can we transition to the trailer? And right after the trailer, it'll go right into a sample cultural insight.
Imanga qanga qoleaqtuaruulugut qaangiqsillaavlugi kinguneeptiginnun qoleaqtuapta kangiqsipkaruuga igilirusia nunam suli qanoq iñuuneqput iluani Aglaan suhraavat utuqqat qoleaqtuat alqarluutaat tatqamna aviktuarutaamikpat taamna siguneribluu uuminga tiiraaliqtu Katikseerut qovirusuutiqartuanik iñugnik iñullaa ikayuutiksramik piqallaaru allagiinin iñuusinin avlaan sivunrat atiruq qaangiqsitaaukkraaukkartugut Aasin taamna ilinnu avittuallasigikput.
One of the things I think a lot of people need to understand is we aren't a museum piece. The Inupiaq people are a living people and a living culture. Even though we're in northern Alaska, which covers this vast area from Nome all the way over the Canadian border, is that there's this extreme value of interconnectedness and interdependence.
It's a hunting society, a gathering society from thousands of years.
This is what creates our culture.
That special relationship between humans and the natural world and the animals, and that it teaches you how to have a society that doesn't do too much harm to the world.
Love and respect for nature, for one another, for our elders. Very, very fundamental value, key to life.
Our values are something that bind us all. The importance of sharing with one another, the importance of spirituality, and the connection to the land, our traditions, how we hunt, sharing of stories and songs and dances.
I'm Inupiaq. I'm from the Arctic Ocean.
I am Inupiaq.
It's very important to me. It's who I am as a person.
And we're very proud of who we are, and we want to continue that.
Okay, next slide. So the game really touched a nerve, more than we ever anticipated. It actually got more press than any game I've ever worked on. We've had thousands of articles, we've had films made about it, we won a BAFTA, and we've had over 4 million players. And it's interesting, probably no week goes by without somebody contacting me, a youth, somebody writing a paper, a classroom, a developer, that wants to do something along the lines of Never Alone. Interestingly, the tribe took their profits. They're now our largest investor. Our chairman is head of the tribe. And Amy, who you saw in that video, who was the Inupiat advisor, is our chief financial officer right now. So we now have a lifelong partnership with the tribe that's been absolutely remarkable. We're actually working on a really interesting multiplayer esport game with the Mississippi Band of Choctaw Indians. So it's been a remarkable experience. Let's go to the next slide. So that inspired us to do more commercial. So here's just some of the, we were a question on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. People have dressed up as the characters, as Nuna and Fox. It's a 2-player cooperative game, a couch co-op. You sit next to each other and play to reinforce interdependence, which was sort of the core theme for both gameplay and really the whole project, if you think about it. So next slide. I think just some more examples of how the game. We also have a slide. We're in museums all over the world. We're in the Smithsonian. It's been just remarkable. We have curriculum that's been done for middle school all the way up to graduate school. One of the impacts of Never Alone was this mix of modalities of having short form video and interactive gameplay, because each of them are powerful mediums, but they have different affordances and weaknesses. Together, they're uniquely powerful. And when I started in video games in the 90s, video had a very bad reputation because people would sort of try to do these branching movies, and they were neither good movies nor were they particularly good gameplay. So video got a very bad and justifiably bad reputation among gamers. But I think we've hit upon a new model where we try to make really strong games and try to keep improving the quality of the gameplay. And since our games are sort of grounded in a vision of helping people understand and shape the world, and they're grounded in reality, having the real people who inspire the game as part of these short insight videos that are optional, but have a context, we think is a powerful approach. And so the BBC contacted us. They were coming out with a documentary called Blue Planet 2, remarkable documentary, multi-part series hosted by David Attenborough about the ocean. And they were big fans of Never Alone and said, we have all of this amazing footage. Could you build an interactive exploration video game and we could unlock ocean insights with remarkable footage of truly amazing explorers and sea life? And we thought about it and said, absolutely. We needed to raise the money ourselves. We co-invest and we raise the money with impact investors. And so just last month, we released a game called Beyond Blue. It's an ocean exploration game where we really want to inspire in players a fascination of the awe and wonder of the ocean. The more you explore the ocean, the more you realize just how little we know and how remarkable it is, and that leads to caring about the ocean. Next slide, please. There's a really good New Zealand connection with this project. We wanted. It was interesting. A lot of the explorers and these aquanauts are absolutely amazing. They're as remarkable as astronauts, but they're exploring the last frontier on Earth. And they often told us that when they were on the boat, on the sub, they would listen to music, and that was a big part of sort of what kept them going. And so Karen Rackman, who I worked with back in my early film days, and went on to do scores like Pulp Fiction and other big films, that lives in New Zealand. And so she helped us put together a really great soundtrack and introduce us to these remarkable New Zealand-based musicians. Our composer, I think you probably recognize Maisie Rika. We have a young woman named Sophie Gibson who is debuting her first song in the game. And so the music has been very well reviewed. We just won an award for the music. Actually, Karen and all of the great musicians won an award. But we try to think about everything when we do a game. We think about the story. We talk about deep sea mining. We talk about issues that people may not be thinking about, but they should be thinking about. We give the player as much a virtual chance to experience the ocean as we can. We think about the environments. We think about everything. And like Never Alone, we unlock, in this case, 16 ocean insights where you meet the scientists who inspired the game. So that's out there now. And we now plan to expand our slate of commercial social impact games. Next slide, please. Actually, we'll play the trailer so you can get a sense for it.
Welcome to the Western Pacific. I'm Dr. Mirai Soto, and I'll be your eyes and ears on this expedition. I'm joined today by two colleagues.
Hello, I'm Andre.
And I'm Irina.
First time on a live stream. Be gentle with her.
That's close enough. You can use your dive watch to control the boy from there.
I'm scanning to train our AI to recognize sperm whales, and so we can hopefully recognize our specific friend later.
Hello, Mirai. Thanks for checking in. Feeling settled in the sub?
I'm great. Nice suit, nice sub.
This solo sub test makes me nervous. We're definitely fitting it out for 2 pilots next time.
Didn't you help design it?
Yes, but now you're driving it.
Well, you don't see that every day. At least I don't.
Neither do I.
Looking good, Mirai. The Manta drone is ready for its first zoom scan.
All right, baby. We won't forget you now.
Great. I've been waiting for this. I have just activated your UV light. Now you can see what a swell shark sees.
That's what I'm talking about. Okay, this dive just keeps getting stranger.
I have something I know you'll want to see.
So the game came out on World Oceans Week, and while it's too early to judge the impact, it's been a very positive launch. We're actually going to turn it into a franchise. We're already planning sequels because there's so many parts of the ocean to explore and so many critical issues to explore. So that's exciting. And when we judge the impact of our games, if you want to go to the next slide, we look at a lot of things with our stakeholders, but we are seeing. It was interesting. One of our funders was specifically interested in us having a female scientist as the avatar that you play. And we also had amazing scientists advise. If you know Dr. Sylvia Earle or Dr. Mandy Joy, they're truly inspiring. And there's a lot of research. Gina Davis has a great organization that does research that shows that when you see characters in a TV show or film or play characters in a game, it inspires you towards those type of careers. And so we were really pleased to see young girls in Twitch streams and in social media talking about wanting to become a marine scientist or a marine or an aquanaut. And that's really exciting. We've seen people do donations to the various nonprofits we've partnered with. And we're starting to seep into popular culture. People are dressing as the characters, all those sorts of things. But it's still very early. We've only been out a month. Next slide, please. A few other things that we work on, at E-Line, we kind of have 3 impact objectives: to bring diverse voices and perspectives to the mediums, and it's a medium that desperately needs diverse voices and perspectives; to explore the big issues of the day, like the future of the ocean, and we have a few others that we're working on. But we also want to help kids become creators, not just consumers of technology. For 7 years with Sesame Workshop, it's one of our early investors, we ran something called the National STEM Video Game Pet Challenge. It was a US-based challenge where kids made video games and the winners got to present them at the White House. You see President Obama playing one of the kids' games. I think it may be the first picture of a sitting, or in this case, squatting US president playing a video game. And we just launched a global challenge. This is live now, so this is an opportunity for youth and nonprofits in New Zealand. With X Prize, it's called Code Games. It's I think the first global youth game making challenge. It's open now through October 14th. It's free to enter. All the tools are free. There's free resources on the website, and it's going to be, we're going to have lots of prizes, and I can talk more about that. But you can also Google Code Games X Prize Challenge. Next slide, please. So this is the last slide. We've moved into some areas beyond video games, but still sort of social impact technology related that I thought might be interested for this group. We have a joint venture with a guy named Alex McDowell. He's a Hollywood production narrative designer. He's best known for designing movies like Minority Report, which was a Steven Spielberg movie around 2000 that envisioned Washington, D.C. in the future. And it was so rigorously researched with lots of amazing scientists advising it that the world that they created, many people saw things in that world and invented them in the real world. So the fiction really did change the real world. And Alex has developed this practice of world building. He teaches at USC. And we have a design agency together where we design worlds for clients. Sometimes they're rich media worlds that you would get in fiction, whether they're movies or games. But increasingly, we're doing a lot of future world design for folks like the American Society of Civil Engineers. We worked with the CEO of Ford Motor Company for his keynote at CES on the future of mobility. When we think about futures, we often think of dystopian futures, because so much fiction is dystopian. Some of it is weirdly utopian, where for some reason all the buildings are white and people wear turtlenecks. There's very few aspirational but achievable, evocative worlds, and yet our vision of the future is often shaped by movies, graphic novels, games, TV. So the idea of creating science-grounded, evocative futures, I think, is a really interesting field, and it's very much overlapping with the type of work that we're doing. And then on a somewhat related, I wrote a book with my two brothers. My middle brother, Neil, runs something called the Center for Bits and Atoms at MIT and started the Global Fab Lab movement. And these are local digital fabrication facilities, kind of like maker spaces, but with advanced digital fabrication connected to a network, so people can be connected globally for designs, but since there's a similar footprint, locally self-sufficient in manufacturing. It's a fascinating suite of technologies. And just to tie it back to Never Alone, since CITC is now our biggest investor and partner, they've been doing amazing world building with their elders, community members, and youth, imagining the future of Alaska and their future of community, leveraging ancient practices that have sustained them for thousands of years with advanced accelerating technology infused with their culture. And that's been an exhilarating world building process. And when we introduced them to the Fab Labs, they now have one of the world's most pioneering Fab Labs. They were honored at the White House. They're now building a network of Fab Labs, again, to be sort of pioneering global connectivity, local sustainability. So it all sort of comes around to harnessing the power of technology and storytelling to help shape futures that we want to inhabit. So with that, I want to leave enough time for any questions and discussions, but thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Alan. And apologies to everybody for the slight hiccup at the beginning there with the technology. Nothing ever runs smoothly, even when you have a rehearsal. So anyway, I'm just going into the group chat. So if anybody could post a question, if they have a question they'd like to ask. So we have one in here that says, based on your experiences, what are some best practices in designing games for social change?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as you might imagine, not a simple answer. You know, most people, when they want to do a game for social change, jump right into the game design. It's like, well, this would be really fun if we did this, this, or this. And that is, of course, important. And that's something that should happen. It is necessary, but by no means sufficient. What we start with, actually, is first of all, and this may sound odd, but first of all, just identifying the stakeholders. Because often when doing a social impact project, there are multiple stakeholders. There might be a nonprofit, there might be a university, there's players, there's community members. So really identifying the stakeholders and identifying the impact that they're seeking. And it's amazing when you start to identify stakeholders, both existing and emerging, you often find out that people have a different view of the impact that they want. So first it's aligning what type of impact and just how the group itself will measure that impact. There's all sorts of external impact measurement rubrics, but we start with just how do the core stakeholders want to measure the impact. And if it's going to be a commercial project, if there's going to be some sort of financial return, what are the economics? Like what level of budget, what level of financial return if it is a for-profit or double bottom line, and what is the tolerance for risk. And so we start there. Then it's actually identifying, once you identify the impact, it's what community does the impact live in? Is it young kids? Is it kids? Is it a broad population? Is it trying to go deep with people who are already committed so they go deeper? Or is it just introducing a concept to folks? And what is the context that they'll experience the game? Are they gonna be on a mobile phone in a refugee camp? Are they gonna be playing on an Xbox or PlayStation or Nintendo at home? The context is absolutely critical. These platforms have very different form factors, very different genres of gameplay, very different business models. So understanding the impact, the audience, psychographic and demographic, the context of the experience, the economic elements, what kind of budget, what kind of return. Is it a game as a product or a game as a service? So Never Alone and Beyond Blue are games as product. They're narrative based. You play and you finish them. Although we'll do what's called DLC, downloaded content, and we'll do a sequel, and we'll keep coming out with new versions. A game as a service is something like Minecraft or Roblox or World of Warcraft or Fortnite, where it doesn't end. It's essentially like a mini business in and of itself. And often the deepest impact in games, we believe over time, will be games as a service, because much as a game as a service can optimize the play pattern for engagement or optimize the business model for financial returns, one could optimize for impact, whether that's deeper civic engagement, donations, or whatever the impact desire is. We're very intrigued with the idea of games as a service in the impact space. But if it's a game as a service, and let's say it's grant funded and the grant runs out, well, how do you sustain it? And believe me, I've seen many, many projects that actually showed some promise, but they ran out of funding. So if it's a game as a service, even if it's philanthropically supported, you still need a sustainable business model. And of course, we can deconstruct every one of these could be, a full hour discussion. But that just gives you sort of some of the highlight considerations that go into a social impact game. I will mention that in the indie game space, it's very different than when I was at Activision. When I was at Activision, we would put a game in a box and put it in Walmart or Best Buy, and we would often advertise on TV as we got bigger, or in the gamer magazines. Today's world is very different. The things that drive sales for a Never Alone or a Beyond Blue are actually probably number one is e-store placement. So placement on Steam, XBLA, PlayStation Network, the App Store on Apple, the Google Store. When you get featured there, which is a blend of curation and algorithm, the sales just go up. The exposure is incredible. And because the tools for game making have become so accessible with Unity and with Unreal, there's so many games out there that it's very hard to rise above the noise. And e-store placement is a little bit like getting on the rack right next to when you walk into Best Buy. That placement's critical, and you have to earn your way there, and you have to earn your way to stay there. And then the other thing, which is entirely new as it relates to going back to the 90s, is Twitch and YouTube. So when streamers play your game, when popular streamers play your game, we also see the sales go up. So understanding kind of the new models of distribution, awareness building is really important. It's a whole nother conversation if we want to talk about schools.
Cool. We've got another question in here which follows on from what you were saying earlier, Alan, which is from Sarah Barham. Have you seen any examples, good or otherwise, of government, local or regional or central government, support for games for social impact?
Yeah, as I mentioned, I'm more familiar, not surprisingly, with what's going on in the US, although we have talked to government agencies around the world. We've worked with a number of government agencies in the US. As I mentioned, there's a sort of collective of program officers at all the different agencies in the US that are doing games in the public interest of some form. And I would recommend other governments do the same, because there's just a lot of learnings to be shared. So this could apply to New Zealand as well, because there's probably multiple agencies looking at games that may not even realize other agencies are looking at games. There are some, there's been some that haven't worked out, but there's some that have worked out really well. Probably the best known one that we had some involvement on early on, and I think has done a great job, is a project called iCivics, it was started by Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, who was a Supreme Court justice in the U.S., who, when she stepped down and would be on her lecture circuit, would be horrified to find that the kids could name the 3 judges on American Idol, but not the 3 branches of U.S. government. And so she realized she's got to harness the power of media. She immediately started to look into games. And so a number of agencies and nonprofits funded an organization called iCivics, which is a nonprofit, to really do a suite of games around civics. And they've done a great job. It's now in the majority of schools in America, because civics is not a big market for the textbook companies, and there really aren't many textbooks, let alone digital curriculum. iCivics has actually become the spine of a curriculum in some states, because it's the only really good civics material. So that's an example of a government-funded game. We worked with everybody from the National Science Foundation to DARPA, to the Department of Ed, to USAID, and the State Department on a variety of game initiatives. So I've always found it interesting that we have a Corporation for Public Broadcasting and PBS in America, but it's very film and video centric. It's not game centric. Now, for young kids, PBS in America is a real national treasure. They do remarkable stuff for kids under the age of 8. But I kind of joke that after Sesame Street and PBS Kids, it sort of falls off a cliff until Downton Abbey and Antique Roadshow. It's really hard for public media to reach tweens, teens, and young adults. And so we think there is a space in government to reach those kids, but it's hard. There's a lot of entertainment options, so it has to be done through powerful partnerships and at a high craft level.
Fantastic, thank you very much. Alan, I had a question for you, which was to do with the new technologies, or not so new these days, but virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality. Can you see there being any significant opportunities, for example, with mobile AR in the games that impact arena?
Absolutely. And we're looking closely at both VR and AR. They're very different. In fact, remarkably different, even though they're sort of bundled together because they're new technologies and they have the word reality in them. VR, although there is social VR, it kind of brings you into this incredibly immersive space, and that has some powerful affordances. Like we are looking at doing an ocean extension, which I think would be remarkable in VR, where you really could feel like you're in one of these submarines really doing the science with all of the cool technologies. And I think that's really, really effective use of virtuality, of being in an immersive space, of really feeling like you're in that place. It's very different kind of design principles to make the experience both powerful and impactful. AR, I think, is equally powerful, but very different. The idea that I can be out in the world and have a layer of storytelling or fiction on top of reality. I mean, I'll give you a very practical example that I've seen firsthand and just works incredibly well, which is learning to use advanced machinery. It used to be you would get a machine and there would be a manual, and the machine wouldn't change for a long period of time and you'd have a manual. The world is changing so fast, the hardware is changing so fast, that the idea that you have an augmented layer that can train you with mentors, people who can see what you're doing, it really is going to be, I think, the future of a lot of type of training. And there's already companies doing it very, very successfully. And it just scratches the surface of what augmented learning can be. The idea, we talked about world building, the idea that you can be in a place and see the history of that place going back 1,000 years, or looking forward into possible or probable or preferred futures of that place, I think is a wonderful opportunity for AR. So we are fans of VR and AR. We're still getting our heads around those technologies, but we will actually be working with both of them, and probably with our partners at Experimental Design.
Fantastic. And we've just had a question in from Maury. My current innovation work harnesses the power of 5G and merging of accelerating technologies for social impact. Would you mind connecting with me? Maureen, my email address is a little bit further up in the chat. So if you get in touch with me, I can connect with Alan as well. So from
one note on that, Tim.
Yep.
One of the things that in the book that I co-wrote with my two brothers, what my middle brother, who's a pioneer of digital fabrication, which is kind of, you mentioned accelerating technologies. Obviously, Moore's Law, we start with the idea that Moore's Law, which when Gordon Moore, who was one of the co-founders of Intel, observed that processing speed was doubling every year or year and a half, he just made that observation. And the article that he wrote it in is worth Googling, because it came out in the late 60s. It was unbelievably prescient. And yet, at that time, very few people in politics and social services, in the social sciences, actually had any idea that technology was doubling, up until probably the late 80s or 90s or more. So as a result, we have these huge digital divides and all of these issues because the social systems didn't co-evolve with the technical systems. And so a lot of what we study in the book is understanding and accelerating technologies, whether it's 5G, whether it's AI, whether it's robotics. There's so many of them. Understanding the rate of change, just how fast is it developing, and what are the social impacts, and what are the kind of societal or institutional structures that need to be in place so that we maximize the positive and minimize the negative. So it is a very interesting issue, and obviously 5G will have great impacts, but it could make the divides deeper, or it could make it less deep. It's all how we act as individuals and as institutions.
Fantastic, thanks, Alan. So a final question, just quickly. We're nearly at the top of the hour. Crafting is so critical and challenging to achieve on the smaller budgets we often get here. Do you have any tips on securing funding or enabling potential investors to really feel the benefits impact gaming could bring? Good question.
Yeah, it's a great question. It's really what I spend a lot of my time doing, which is, we haven't yet had the success of an Activision. We've done well. So that we can expand our slate and we can co-invest, but we're not at the point yet where we can fully invest in all the things we'd like to invest in. So I do spend a lot of my time raising funds. Interestingly, we haven't raised any funds from traditional venture capital. It's all been from impact investors, often individuals who've made a lot of money in technology or media and just naturally recognize the impact of technology and media. They start sort of understanding the impact. Often family offices, there's a lot of wealthy people who are now putting their wealth towards not just philanthropy, but double, triple bottom line businesses. There are organizations, the large foundations do what's sometimes called mission-related investing or program-related investing. And those are interesting sources of funding. And it's trying to figure out whether within whatever budget you're working, you can scope the level of impact you want, and that comes down to a lot of creative design. But we start with people in general that are passionate about the impact, and then we educate them on the power of the medium to complement and further their impact. And that's actually where we've had the most success in our fundraising.
Marvelous. Thank you very much indeed, Alan, for your time today. I'd like to particularly thank the US Embassy for setting this up in the first instance with their fabulous Arts Envoy program. Thank you to Tech Week and Lauren in particular from the Dunedin Tech Week for helping set this up. And thanks to the New Zealand Game Developers Association and also Dunedin's Centre of Digital Excellence, all of whom have played a part in making this happen today. If you are a game developer and you are interested in participating in a masterclass, which we're hoping to organise with Alan, then if you keep your eyes peeled to the usual game development channels in New Zealand, and you'll receive notification of the opportunity to participate in that. So thank you so much, Alan. It was absolutely fascinating hearing you talk about your journey, and the insights have been really, really useful. So, and I think everyone is expressing their thanks in the comments right now.
Well, thank you, Lauren. Thank you, Tim. And thanks, everyone, for coming out. I really appreciate it. And hopefully it'll be an ongoing conversation.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Stay safe, everybody.
Yep. Goodbye.
Take care. Bye-bye.